Welcome everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect with you. So on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. The webinar will begin shortly, and it will be recorded and shared with you afterwards. Okay, once again, welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I will be behind the scenes helping to produce this webinar. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure to select panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage your engagement by posting questions in the Q&A box. We will dedicate the last portion of the conversation to respond to the questions you post during the discussion. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed to all who registered. And we are live streaming this webinar on our Facebook Live. All resources that you see shared as links in the chat will be compiled and shared in a follow-up email to all webinar registrants. And materials are accessible on GLR's Community Learning for Impact Improvement platform, aka CLIP. Please take 30 seconds to create an account if you haven't yet, so that you do not miss the bios, slides, and other materials from today's session. We will be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during Q&A and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement at the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Lastly, before we start, I would just like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars. Next week on April 27th, we have an exciting Learning Loss Recovery Challenge Forum co-sponsored with Education Week, titled The Fall K-3 Classroom, What the Data Imply About Composition, Challenges, and Opportunities, that will feature the Rollins Center for Language and Literacy, among several other prominent, thought and action leaders. On May 4th, we have an exciting doubleheader with a peer exchange at 12:30 Eastern Time, featuring the campaign's mission-critical partner, Raising a Reader. And at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we will follow on to our February and March sessions on EdTech as a key strategy for rapid and broad-scale recovery with our colleagues from the Overdeck Family Foundation and others with key tech-enabled solutions to address learning loss. We'll be sure to add a link in the chat box for more information and registration for these upcoming learning opportunities. Joining you now is our content lead, Elizabeth Sierri, Executive Director of Teaching and Learning at Foundations Incorporated. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thanks, Sierra. I just want to welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar. This webinar is entitled 22 Billion for After School and Summer, Realizing the Opportunity for Communities. As Sierra mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of Teaching and Learning at Foundations, Inc. Foundations, Inc. is a national education nonprofit that focuses on capacity building and professional learning for educators. We do this both during the school day and in beyond school hours. Today, we are going to talk about how local programs can access and leverage ESSER III funds to address learning loss, operationalize better practices, and spend the money wisely over the next at least 36 months. So before we meet our featured speakers for today, I have the privilege of introducing our moderator and my leader, the President and CEO of Foundations, Inc., Rhonda Lauer. Rhonda is a former Philadelphia teacher, principal, and superintendent. Rhonda has led Foundations since 1997, guiding its growth from a regional program provider to an organization that is nationally recognized for its success in transforming the world of teaching and learning by strengthening the skills of educators. Welcome, Rhonda. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for this important conversation. When it's about the money, it is all about the money, but you know what? It's really about the kids. So I am so excited about this discussion and this afternoon. I want to take a few minutes to set the context for our conversation. The American Rescue Plan Act designates billions of dollars for schools to help students recover from learning loss and accelerate learning through the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund that are known as ESSER. Today, we're going to talk about ESSER 3, and we're going to talk about the ESSER 3 set-asides, which are so important. 22 billion, and listen to that number, 22 billion of those funds have been targeted for comprehensive after-school and summer enrichment programs for our children. These funds present a golden opportunity to maximize those hours after school and in the summer. Most importantly, to build and rebuild relationships, to engage students and families, and to recover from learning loss. Every single student, every single child has suffered learning loss over this past year, as we well know. And at the end of the day, we know that it is possible to accelerate student growth and development. So now is the time for schools and community organizations to partner and mobilize in ways that will have the greatest impact on our children. Now is the time to commit to these partnerships, as Elizabeth said, not just for the short term. The short term is yes, we want, and you're going to hear about marvelous summer programs that we can and that we want to make sure we create and have kids participate in this summer. But remember, we have at a minimum 36 months to ensure that our kids get the quality programs that they deserve. So these partnerships are just so incredibly important. During today's webinar, we'll discuss how long-established programs and organizations with proven success can partner with school systems to access these funds. Secondly, we're going to talk about ensuring that funds support the effective integration of enrichment, social, emotional learning, and academics. And third, how highly effective programs, those that always make learning fun, can expand access to the over 19 million children who would take part if the program was available to them. And now I have the pleasure of introducing our dynamic and excellent speakers today. I do want to remind you that in-depth bios for all speakers have been posted in the chat, and so I'm going to be really quick. Our first speaker is Kylie Wheeler. Kylie is project manager at the Children's Funding Project. She specializes in building child-centered, comprehensive, and strategic financing plans at both the state and local levels. Kylie has been tracking the federal response to COVID-19 as it relates to new and flexible funding for children and youth. Terry Peterson. It's always my honor and privilege to introduce my good friend, Terry Peterson. He is a man who wears many hats. Terry is known across the country as the King of After School. He was given that title by our 6th United States Secretary of Education, Richard Riley. In fact, I have to tell you one little snippet. Terry is the only person in America who has served 8 years as the Chief Education Deputy for a governor and also for the United States Secretary of Education. Currently, Terry co-chairs the Afterschool Alliance. He is education advisor to the C.S. Mott Foundation, and I am proud to say a member of Foundation's National Advisory Committee. After we hear from Kylie and Terry, we'll be joined by a number of commentators from 3 cities around the country. Candice Buchanan from Wilmington, Delaware, Stacie Evans and Lara Ohanian from Baltimore, and Chris Smith and Tony Wiley from Boston. Candice Buchanan is president of SummerCollab. At SummerCollab, Candice focuses on developing high-quality programming and strengthening partnerships, and listen to this one, to make summer smarter for our kids and communities. These programs include the Summer Literacy Corps for kids in kindergarten through grade 5 and Tyler's Camp for middle schoolers. Stacie Evans is President and Chief Executive Officer for Young Audiences of America, she should be for America, of Maryland. Under Stacie's leadership, since 2004, Young Audiences outreach has expanded to every school district in Maryland, partnering with 500 school and community-based sites, and annually impacting 190,000 students, teachers, and artists. Lara Ohanian is the Director of Differentiated Learning in the Baltimore City Public Schools. She oversees English for speakers of other languages, gifted and advanced learning, and extended learning, allowing her to support the continuum of learners and prepare them for college and career. Chris Smith is Executive Director of Boston Afterschool and Beyond. Chris led the creation of Boston's data-driven network of 300 programs, as well as the nationally recognized Boston Summer Learning Project, which has served 50,000 students since 2010. And Tony Wiley is Chief Executive Officer of Sportsman's Tennis and Enrichment Center. Under Tony's leadership, the center has built competitive, developmental, and community programs for youth and adults, and achieving local, regional, and national acclaim. So I will apologize right now. All of a sudden, in my backyard, my landscaper decided to come and drive by, so please forgive me. So with that, I'm going to turn to Kylie and ask her to get us started by sharing an overview of the ESSER funds. What are the funds about? How will they flow? And how have these funds been set aside for after school and summer? Kylie?
Thank you so much, Rhonda. Hi, everybody. I'm so glad to be here on behalf of Children's Funding Project. Thank you so much to the Campaign for Grade Level Reading and Foundations, Inc. for putting this webinar together and for giving us all an opportunity to learn from each other about this. I am here today to do two things. First, I want to put this huge number. Oh, it looks like I might be having internet issues. One moment.
If you are, Kylie, we can go to Terry and come back to you, but.
Is this any better?
It is.
Okay, my apologies, my apologies. Okay, so I am here today to do two things. First, I'm going to help put this huge number in context of the American Rescue Plan, but also federal COVID-19 relief more generally. And I'm also going to break down how the 22 billion national total will translate to the state and local levels. So when we talk about this 22 billion, we are talking about the portion of the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, or ESSER 3, allocated by law in the American Rescue Plan to local education agencies or school districts, specifically for after-school summer enrichment and learning recovery. And just to give you a sense here of where that 22 billion fits in, this slide shows all of the other funding within the American Rescue Plan that directly or indirectly benefits children, youth, and their families. And if you are interested in learning more about what else is in the American Rescue Plan for kids, CFP, Children's Funding Project, did recently publish a Cradle to Career Guide to Federal COVID-19 Relief that I believe was just linked in the chat. But our main topic today lies in the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund from the American Rescue Plan, or as we will repeatedly refer to it, ESSER 3. Now, we say ESSER 3 because there have already been two other cash infusions into ESSER. And as you'll see on the next slide, the first was in March 2020's CARES Act, ESSER 1. The second in December 2020's Coronavirus Response and Relief Act, ESSER 2. And again, our focus today is on what is in this yellow box here, ESSER 3 from the American Rescue Plan. So let's go ahead and break down the $122.8 billion that is part of the total of ESSER 3, or the total of ESSER 3, so that we can better understand where we get this 22 billion figure and what that means for after school, summer, and learning recovery for states and communities across the country. So if you head to the next slide, and the one after that, we see here, we start with 122.8 billion allocated in the American Rescue Plan to ESSER 3 as a whole. And right off the top, 800 million of that is going to identify and address youth homelessness. So that leaves us with 122 billion. 90% of that is going to local school districts by way of state education agencies, so your state Department of Education. So the state is going to receive its full share of ESSER 3, but then within 60 days, the state has to disperse 90% of that funding to local school districts. So once they've done that, that means 110 billion going to school districts across the United States. We take it one step lower. 20% of that must be spent on after school, summer, and learning recovery. In general, evidence-based programs, programs that address social emotional learning. And you can see in this, in the bottom left part of the slide, the examples of eligible programs that this 20% can serve. But this 20% is the 22 billion that we keep referring to. And we aren't going to focus much on this today, but the state education agencies are still keeping 10% of their allocation of ESSER 3. So you see the 12.2 billion, 10% of the total allocation reserved for state education agencies. Even that has some pretty tight guardrails on it for how those dollars must be spent at the state level. And about 7% of those dollars in any given state must be used for learning recovery, summer, and after school. So that is a whole separate opportunity, in addition to the 22 billion, that school districts, advocates, and community-based programs can advocate for smart use of these funds for the same purpose that we're talking about with the 22 billion for local school districts.
Kylie, could you, when you talk about the 12.2 billion, could you just drill down a little bit and talk to us about specifically what that means? What is, when you drill down, what is that?
Like in a state and local context?
Yes, please.
Sure. So actually, if you go to the next slide, I thought it might be helpful to look at an average state. I chose Virginia and Virginia Beach City Public Schools because that's where I'm currently living. And so if we look at the state of Virginia, Virginia is going to be receiving about $2.1 billion as part of ESSER 3. That means 90% of that 2.1 billion, 1.9 billion, is going to these school districts you see here. Each of these geographic boundaries represents some portion of the 1.9 billion. Virginia Beach City Public Schools, in this bottom right-hand corner down there, will be receiving about 78.8 million. And that means that Virginia Beach City Public Schools must spend around 15 million, at least 15 million, on learning recovery in its various forms that we've referred to multiple times. So this is great. And Virginia Beach City Public Schools can make great use of this 15 million, but only if they strategically partner with community-based organizations to get these dollars out the door efficiently and equitably. And I'm actually not entirely sure what the Virginia Beach Public Schools administrative capacity is right now, but I do know that across the country and across the state, across the country, local school districts do not necessarily have the built-in administrative capacity to handle these large cash infusions. So that's why it is so important for both the school district to be strategic, but also for programs and advocates to approach the direction and the influencing of these funds strategically. And I mean, that's why we're all here today, to talk about how we enter into partnerships to make the most of these funds. So if you want to go to the next slide. So just a few key timing points to think of as we're thinking about these funds. Technically, the Federal Department of Education has 60 days from when the American Rescue Plan was passed to disperse funding to states. In most cases, at least 2/3 of that funding has already gone to your state Department of Education. States then have 60 days to allocate these funds, their 90%, to their local school districts. The only other milestone that we have here really is the end of federal fiscal year 2023, September 30th, 2023, for these funds to be obligated. So by that point, your school district and your state must at least have a legally binding plan for how to spend these funds. But that's a pretty fantastic time horizon to have for planning and partnership, et cetera. So just keep that in mind, that these dollars do not have to be spent all at once. We have time to deploy them strategically. So it's just something to keep in mind. We want to move forward. So real quick, I'm going to be mindful of time. ESSER 3 funds have various maintenance of effort and maintenance of equity requirements. And I'm not going to get into the specifics of these right now, but basically these guardrails ensure that states and local school districts do not substantially reduce per pupil funding when they receive these new dollars. So we're grateful to see those guardrails in place, if only to add some structure to what are actually very flexible dollars. And then next slide, please. I also want to quickly mention that ESSER 3 dollars are not the only dollars in the American Rescue Plan for learning recovery, for summer, for after school, for workforce development, all of the things we care about. There was also $39 billion in combined funds to the Child Care and Development Block Grant and a new Child Care Stabilization Fund, $350 billion in direct relief to state and local governments that is extremely flexible and can be used for these purposes. And then $852 million for the Corporation for National and Community Service, and a few others when creatively leveraged. So start here, but know that there's also a lot of opportunity in the rest of these COVID relief funds. And then I think finally, I just wanted to include some helpful resources, and I think some of these have been linked in the chat, including our guide, some of the most recent federal guidance. I want to give a huge shout out to helpkidsrecover.org. This is where you can find your state's school district level allocation for ESSER 3. It's very granular, super helpful. And yeah, I'm so excited to hear from everyone else today. And I think at this point, I will pass it off to Rhonda and get to hear from Terry in just a moment.
Hey, thank you, Kylie. And you answered, someone from Pennsylvania asked where they could find out how much money was allocated to their state. So that's in helpkidsrecover.org. And someone else asked in the chat box if all the slides will be available to them. And I understand that they will be. So the answer is yes. So I'm going to ask Terry to tell us more about the funds and how after school and summer programs can access the funds and partner with school districts to expand programs. Terry?
Thank you so much, Rhonda and Kylie. Thank you for that big overview. There's a lot of money, obviously, available from the American Rescue Plan, way beyond education, but including education. And I think the challenge is that the numbers sound big. It's hard to kind of envision how that might actually affect your community and your schools. And that's what I want to concentrate on. If you go to the next slide. So I'm going to talk just about the 22 billion. And when you see those big numbers, like 100 billion, you might think that for some reason, summer enrichment and comprehensive after school are being compromised. We've never had this language in federal legislation before with this kind of numbers. And just to give you an idea, in most school districts and schools that have 50 or more % students on free or reduced lunch, they should be able to, with these funds, be able to offer a summer enrichment and comprehensive after-school opportunity with ESSER 3 fundings for 3 to 4 years. Next slide, please. As there you go. As Kylie mentioned, there's also larger amounts of ESSER funds for the regular school day. But even in that language, I want to point out that some of those funds can be used to wrap around services around a summer enrichment program or around a comprehensive after-school program. For example, there may be a need for mental health services or turning the school into a full service community school with summer and after school and wraparound services. Those other ESSER funds can be used in conjunction with the after school and summer monies. This is very important. Just think of that. Just think in your community, if your school district or school could use these monies for this purpose. Now, you might say, we have 40% of our students low income, or 30. My hunch is you still will be receiving ESSER monies, not as much magnitude, but even then there should be a chance with clever planning and partnerships to offer summer and after school programs. So don't give up. Really start looking and getting involved in your schools, in your school district. Next slide. I'm going to mention 3 things to remember. As Kylie mentioned, the word evidence-based is used throughout ESSER 3, and that's really important. And you'll hear more about that from our hosts from particularly Maryland and Boston in just a minute. But we do have the evidence. There is a growing body of evidence the last 10, 15 years that well-planned, well-designed after-school and summer opportunities do in fact really help enhance student learning, including, I know many of you are on this because you're interested in reading. These enriched comprehensive programs have done well and designed well, do in fact help with reading, math, social emotional learning, and STEM if that's the focus. But they have to be interesting and engaging. And that's why hands-on learning, arts integration, real world experiences become very important. And our panelists will talk about that a little later. Next slide, please. Reminder 2, and I saw there was a couple questions in the chat box about this. Community school partnerships in designing and delivering engaging summer and after school opportunities are not just a nice idea. I visit hundreds of programs. I've read hundreds of studies, and you cannot find a really solid, good, sustained after school and summer program that doesn't include a partnership with schools and community partners. And it's also critical because these monies are designed to be expended in about 3 or 4 years, that if you want to sustain the programs long-term, that's most likely going to happen if you have school community partnerships. A couple notes on building partnerships. If you're in the education community, really sit back for a little bit and go out and think about partners in your community from all kinds of sectors who could pitch in and help with the summer and after school experiences to make them more engaging, more enriching. In some communities or neighborhoods, or maybe in smaller towns and rural communities, you may not have many partners. Don't limit your search to just your immediate neighborhood. There may be a neighboring community or a regional group or statewide group who could help you in your programming. And another critical feature in partnerships is it takes people to manage it. If you're really going to have a successful program, most of them have a site coordinator. It could be an employee of the school district or school. It could be an employee of a lead community-based organization, or it could be a contract you have between the district and a lead community organization to coordinate all the after school and summer partners for a successful program. Next slide.
Terry, before we go to the next slide, I just want to ask a question. We know you're the king, but has the Department of Education given any guidance?
Thank you. Yeah, actually, the next slide will help me. So that's very timely, Rhonda. You read my mind. I love it. Yes, being a pseudo king doesn't have much power. You actually have to look at the guidance, and the U.S. Department of Education just put out important guidance on use of all the ESSER 3 funds. I have the date wrong. I think it is maybe the April 9th, not 21st. What's interesting in this guidance is this is for all the ESSER money, not just the money set aside for after school and summers, but look at what they are stressing in the guidance for the use of ESSER money in general, but it particularly applies for summer and after school programs. Include enrichment opportunities that support social, emotional, and academic development, along with other learning strategies. Yes, if in a summer and after school program, some students might need tutoring. A lot of after school programs have homework help, but that doesn't consist of a summer enrichment program or a comprehensive after school program. It really is, those two areas are part of a broad array of enrichment activities that are needed. And later you'll hear from our panelists why they have found things like physical fitness and arts programs, STEM activities and youth development are key to really developing a full child and getting the results we want. And relationships, successful programs include that. And another guidance key here is make the programs inclusive and supportive of families, including providing transportation and meals, and really designing the program so it reaches a whole host of students who really can benefit from the programs. Next. So what are some good ways or options to invest these new funds? Keep in mind a couple things. I think the intent is, and the need is immediate. We need to have things happen this summer and next school year and after school, but also continue on for several years. So going to the next slide, you might think of keeping kind of the urgency in mind, the need to reach more young people in areas that need them the most. You might think of these priorities. If you have some people might call them summer or after school deserts, where there hardly are any programs, or maybe they're too expensive if they exist at all. Think of ways in which you could allocate some of these ESSER 3 local monies to organizations that are already running successful programs, but ask them to work in some additional neighborhoods or schools providing after school or summer programs in high need neighborhoods. So you don't have to start from scratch. You don't waste a year just planning something. You get something going right away with people who know what they're doing. Also, we have many sites after school and summers that are high quality, but they don't begin to serve all the young people who could benefit from the program in their neighborhood or school. So think about adding funding to those sites to make them more engaging, for more extensive outreach, for more parent involvement, so that you take the program that's there and reach more young people. Also, and a third thought is that in a number of communities, quality programs were lost during the pandemic. How could you restart those programs? There's probably some remnant of an infrastructure of that program already there. Build it back with the funding. Another fourth consideration, in many communities, there are high quality 21st century grantees, already running programs in several sites. How could they be provided additional funding to the grantees to add more sites in the summer or after school? And a final point, we clearly do not have enough programs and opportunities for young people in late middle school and high school. So think of new strategies, new partners, new coalitions to reach these young people. Continuing on. Next slide, please. So kind of beginning to wrap up. There is ESSER 3 funding specifically in law for comprehensive after-school and summer programs. At the end of the day, I would hope that most school communities with 50% or more low-income children would have either additional or better summer and after-school opportunities, and even those perhaps in the 40% category. It is critical to leverage community, cultural, and youth groups to help provide these opportunities, working hand in glove with educators. Right now, more than ever, we need to have more hearts and hands involved in this effort. So what do? What happens? The money is beginning to flow to the school district. Some don't even know what they're receiving yet. This is so new and so big. So be persistent, but be friendly. So find community groups who want to work with you in expanding quality summer and after school enrichment. And find local educators who are doing this or interested in this, and join together and help make a case to your superintendent of school board. Help plan together to really have some exciting opportunities this summer and next fall for the next 3 years. And as my mother used to say, if you don't ask, no one else will. Our students and families are depending on you, all of you on this webinar, almost 500 of you. Next slide. The best way to start is just get a group together, after school summer providers with educators who are really interested in this, and begin planning and share your ideas with your school district, with the local schools who have high needs. Next slide. Let me wrap up. There are so many things that young people need right now, and support from all of us in schools, out of school, in summers, in homes, in after school. But I like to think of all this as, I'm not saying that after school or summers are the silver bullet for all learning disruptions, but I am saying it is increasingly apparent that they may in fact be a silver lining, an important strategy, a piece of the education puzzle, and especially for the recovery and acceleration after this incredible pandemic. So thank you for what you do. But I don't want you to stop there. We have a huge challenge, but also a huge opportunity, and for the first time in a long time, with funding. So please help make something great happen.
Thank you, Terry. That was great. Kylie and Terry, thank you so much. We're now going to hear from 3 local programs, and we're going to start right away with Candice Buchanan from Wilmington, Delaware. So Candice, would you first comment on what you heard from Kylie and Terry, and then tell us a little bit about your incredible summer learning program in Wilmington?
Yes, thank you, Rhonda. Good afternoon, everyone. And many thanks to Kylie and Terry. I think they shared a lot of very valuable information that folks are really interested in. So keep your questions coming in the question and answer box, and we'll keep getting those answered. There are 3 points that I heard them mention that I think are critical to highlight. And the first, I think we're all here because of kids, and we talk about student growth and development, and making sure that we're recognizing the whole child. Academics are critically important, and there's this big focus on literacy and accelerating learning, but we also have to recognize that our kids have been through a lot this last year, just as we have, our educators have, and it's important that as we're planning these summer and after school programs and working with our communities to do so, that we're not strictly focused on those academics. And so thinking of whole child development and really making sure that, summer remains a place of exploration and fun for our kids. The other point is the commitment to long-term partnerships. This is unprecedented times, a huge amount of money, and there is certainly some urgency to this situation. But we don't have to, get out and getting everything 100% right away. These funds are going to be available to be spent over the next 3 to 4 years. And so we want to kind of capitalize on existing programs in the here and now for this summer and work on building those with our schools and communities over the next several years. And on that note, speaking of our existing organizations that are out there doing phenomenal work, here in Delaware, we have places like the Boys and Girls Clubs, YMCAs, and other local youth serving nonprofits who are already doing incredible work. There's lots of local expertise in each of your states, and it's important that you don't forget about that. Making sure, we've, in a lot of cases, we've already spent a lot of time forming partnerships with each other, with our school districts. We've got that expertise. The one thing that's always been missing is funding. And now we have a really great opportunity to take a hold of that and really do some great things. And so, don't think that you have to look nationally to get things done. There are lots of great resources out there, but your local folks know your kids, they know your community, and giving them the resources that they need to be even more successful is a really great place to start. So, those are kind of the 3 things that I heard Kylie and Terry talking about that I wanted to highlight. And I can switch gears and talk a little bit about how SummerCollab has kind of, used some of those same themes in the work that we do here in Delaware. We are the Summer Learning Collaborative, also known as SummerCollab, and our hashtag is making summer smarter in all ways, not just thinking about the academics, but working with communities to work smarter and not harder. Really to make sure that we're serving our kids in the best way that we know how. This really involves year-round collaboration. We focus mostly on the summertime, but as most of you know, summer starts in September is something that a lot of folks say. It's year-round planning to make sure that you're working with your parents, working with the students, hearing what they want, what they need, what they desire, and with your schools and districts to make sure that you're aligned on what the kids should be exposed to and for the upcoming school year. One of the things that has made us successful is our focus on learning and iteration, and that idea that, that it's continuous feedback and learning loops. We provide surveys, we do assessments, data is really critical from program participants to staff, to parents, to schools. And we really use that feedback to make our programming better year after year after year. And so again, on that note, we want to make sure we get out in front of our schools and our community partners to get out there this summer and use that as kind of the starting point for greatness over the next couple of years. For us, one of the other, important things is training plans. We focus very heavily on our staff. Most of them are coming from, they're educators themselves. We also work with talented high school and college students who are interested in youth development. And we've got about 55% return rate every year for our staff members, which really helps with the relationship building with the kids year to year. And so I know, we are very, very focused on the kids, but we don't want to forget about the staff who are a critical part of that conversation as well. And again, I talked about the developmental and the academic programming. We focus on literacy, but what's what's most important to us is really our commitment to the joy of summer. And we talk about, you'll see our little light bulb there. We really talk about igniting a passion for learning, and that's across the board, building self-confidence to try things, to fail, to get up, try again, and do it until you learn what that process is like, so that you can be successful. And we bring that to everything that we do, so that when kids return to the school in the fall, they're more likely to ask more questions and be more inquisitive about learning across the board, because they've had a chance to explore things and learn about how they learn and what they're interested in learning. So just a little bit more about our two programs. Our Summer Literacy Core program is an AmeriCorps program, and we have 50 AmeriCorps members who we train in another comprehensive training program to deliver one-on-one targeted literacy programming to kindergartners through fifth graders. And we do that by working with our local community centers, who already have established programs in place, and we provide them, we provide their kids with 30 minutes of the one-on-one literacy intervention a day. And we, again, are very much focused on that relationship. And so, we've got all of the science of reading and all of the phonics, the reading comprehension, and all of the fun stuff that the state likes to look at for standards, but we're also very focused on the social emotional learning piece. And so the first couple of days are really spent on relationship building, because our core members are working with their kids for 6 to 8 weeks straight. And it's really important for them to be comfortable with one another, so that they can actually enjoy what they're doing. And we have a lot of cases where we see kids who are coming in far behind grade level, and ending the summer on grade level, because they didn't want to let down their core member, their new reading buddy, and they spend a lot of additional time doing things that you wouldn't expect them to be doing over the summer. And we see about 80% of our kids who show growth in those 6 to 8 weeks over the summer, and about 11% of them show growth of a year or more, which is really incredible. And so you'll see a lot of talk about high dosage tutoring, and I am also an advocate, and we have a program that we believe is very successful in targeting our kindergartners through fifth graders. For our middle schoolers, we focus on, we've got our own Tyler's Camp, and that is, again, very much focused on this kind of joy of summer. There are daily literacy workshops that are taught by literacy instructors from our schools that we work with. So kids go to the same school, they're seeing the same literacy teachers, and they also receive social emotional learning workshops by our partners at Strive, who do leadership workshop and development. Their afternoons are spent doing a variety of activities, as you'll kind of see here. We've got robotics, they get to build drones, all kinds of sports, graphic design, all of the arts. We've got chorus, dance. And so it really is about ensuring that their summer is a place that they can continue to have fun, and learn while they're doing it, and increase their love of learning. And so if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer them in the chat, but I do want to turn it over to my colleagues who also have some other phenomenal programs happening throughout the country.
Thank you so much, Candice. And I'm so happy that you really focused a lot on staff and relationship building, because that is so important. That makes the programs all that much better for our kids. I want to turn now to Stacie and Lara and ask them to talk about what they're working on in Baltimore. So exciting. Stacie?
Sure. Okay. Well, thanks so much for having us. And we're going to roll through these slides, because I see all the great questions that are in the chat. I have some of those questions too, so we're going to roll through it. And I just want you to know we'll be here for Q&A. You can also reach out to us independently if you have questions about the model. So Young Audiences, which is a community-based organization, one of those organizations that Terry was talking about, partners with the Baltimore City Public Schools to provide a 5-week free full day program that primarily serves children. We're serving about 2,000 kids each summer from about 100 different schools. And those children could benefit from having additional support in reading and math, and then also, just opportunities to develop creatively and personally. So the question for us in Baltimore was like, how do we get kids to voluntarily come to a program in the summer where they're going to be spending 3 hours on math and literacy? I mean, when they could be going out and playing outside. So the solution for us was to integrate the arts into that instruction and to really leverage what we think is a fabulous asset and resource within our community, which are our artists. So if you go to the next slide, what you'll see is that we bring our Baltimore City school teachers together with community artists, and we give them a literacy handbook, and part of the week that they spend together in professional development introduces them to this approach of arts integrated learning, and as well as the central texts that we use. And we basically sort of have them see model lessons, and then we send them forth, like go forth and collaborate on your own and dream up all these ways that you're going to draw kids into learning. And what you'll see here is we really ask a lot of questions and ask them to answer this through the creative process. Questions like who am I? What are my unique attributes and how do I know that I belong? And so those are the things that we tackle through our arts integrated literacy lessons. And so if you are a school district or you're a community partner and you're wondering, well, how do I bring these two minds together, artists and educators? I am going to drop into the chat a model like collaborative planning session so you can see how we marry those two things. And then I'm also going to drop into the chat the really yummy, delicious central texts that we're going to be working on this summer that really are rooted in belonging. And now I am going to pass it off to Laura to talk about some of our math interventions.
Sure. I'm actually going to be really very brief. So we are focused on both math and ELA. The math and ELA curriculum align to the school year curriculum. So it's very important for us that as a partner, Young Audiences is focused on what we prioritize and that kids are engaging in the curriculum. So we use Eureka Math during the school year, and it is also used in the summer. I'm going to go to the next slide. Over the past 4 years, we have expanded programming, you can see, and I believe the year before this was only 2 sites. Each year we've expanded from 4 to 8 sites. As a district partner, one of the questions I've gotten many times is like, how did you decide to expand? What do you look for in expansion? So what we're looking for, and we'll talk about evaluation in just a second. We're also looking for student engagement and interest. And as you can see, the remarkable improvement in attendance, which was coupled with an after-school program. So originally, Young Audiences, the Summer Arts and Learning Academy, so SAL, I'll refer to it as, had 66% decent attendance, but we didn't have an aftercare program that was associated with it. As soon as we partnered with an after-school program, so that even in the summer, the parents had an opportunity for their kids to go from, morning to closer to like 5 or 6 o'clock if they needed it. Our attendance increased significantly. So you can see that. I'm going to keep going. One of the things that's very important to us as a partner with organizations is an evaluation, right? Not only a pre and post, which a lot of providers for summer will give us. So what was the improvement from the beginning to the end of the program, but what does that mean from the end of the year results to beginning of year results? So how does this summer program mitigate summer learning loss? How does that summer program impact the student and in the next school year or in future years? And what we found over the years of doing fairly rigorous evaluation of all of our summer programs, with SALA specifically, what we found is kids who are in the program more than a few years in a row show marked improvement. We've seen improvements in scores in both ELA and math. We have seen significant summer learning loss, especially in the area of math. We've seen changes in specific domains in DIBELS. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but we do every year, any program we work with, look very closely at the students in that program compared to their peers who were not in the program and how they performed. I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay, before I even talk about specifically, and I think we can talk about this, we can answer questions in the chat. I wanted to talk a little bit about, given the increased funding, given the importance of what summer can do for us, what are we thinking about as priorities and important areas for us, for at least from Baltimore City, from our perspective, or at least from my perspective? We're looking to prioritize in-person opportunities for kids. We really want kids to be excited about school again. We want teachers to be excited about school again. So, we want to offer opportunities for the relationships between adults and students to be emphasized. We want to expand programming, but we also want to increase the length of programming. So, in past years, we may have done 5 weeks, we'll do 6 weeks. Really looking at targeted academic tutoring, right? So on top of looking at relationships and the importance of SEL, how do we really target support for certain students and hone in on skills that they might need through specific tutoring? And for us, as we're talking about here, partnerships with organizations like the Amazing Young Audiences program, and really thinking about what different modalities and needs are of kids and how we match students to programs. So this year, for example, with Young Audiences, we're going to have 2 intensive sites that are focused on English language learners, right? There are sites that will be not only have the traditional ELA math, but will do English language development supports in conjunction with the teaching artist at those sites. So it's about, how do you support your continuum of learners? How do you help kids have opportunities for relationships with each other and their teachers? And how do you get everybody excited about school again and provide the very strategic interventions that certain kids will need through tutoring? I'm going to turn it over to our next partner. And thank you again for letting us share. And I really appreciate even just being part of this. So thanks.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much. I'm going to now turn to Chris Smith and Tony Wiley, and they're going to talk about Boston After School and Beyond and the Sportsman Tennis Enrichment Center. Chris?
Thanks, Rhonda. Good to be with you all. So first of all, evidence-based and fun can go together. And if I succeed in the next few minutes, it'll be to show you how Boston has combined academics and enrichment, also known as fun, and got results. And I'm going to post much more detail on the chat that you can pursue. But I wanted to share 4 lessons from 10 years of summer learning in Boston. And for those of you in the audience who may be thinking about a citywide strategy, these might be helpful. And the first lesson is to think about the entire community as a classroom, to think beyond boundaries. Learning can happen anywhere. As you know, it doesn't have to happen in school. And as you'll hear from my colleague in a minute or two, it actually happens in a tennis bubble and on the tennis court. The second major lesson is to cultivate a diverse network of organizations to be a part of your approach. In Boston, we have 150 programs, and it's a very diverse array, from outdoor programs to arts programs to entrepreneurship programs, college-based, work-based, you name it. There's huge diversity. And the reason why is because we want to match the diverse interests and needs of young people. There's something for everyone in this. The third lesson is to focus on a set of cross-cutting skills. We codify this in Boston as the Achieve, Connect, Thrive framework. And you'll see these are skills like critical thinking, communication, perseverance. They're precursors to learning. They're more than related to academics. They're necessary in order to engage academically. And they're important in their own right and relevant to college and career success. And we find that youth development organizations, whatever their area of focus, whether it's sports, arts, or something else, that building these skills with young people comes naturally to them. And finally, it's not enough to say you're doing this work, but it's necessary to measure and learn from one another. So our fourth lesson is to measure and improve together. And what distinguishes our citywide network of over 150 programs is that each one of them adopts a common suite of assessment tools at the program level and at the student level, which enables us to learn from one another in the network and see trends citywide. And this focus on data lends us credibility, because with new federal funds will come lots of rigor in looking at how it's being spent. We've developed a set of partnership technology over the years that enables data gathering and analysis, which facilitates improvement so we can learn what programs are particularly good at, and serves as a measure of accountability. I will summarize with this. The research from RAND, and I'll share it in the chat along with this lessons learned document, shows that students in Boston's model of summer learning, which was done in other cities around the country as well, called the National Summer Learning Project. It's a 25-day program, full day, 5 days a week, academics in the morning generally, enrichment the rest of the day. High attending participants outperform their peers in math, ELA, and social emotional skills. And that academic effect persisted for months, in some cases years. So it started out as a way to help city kids have more fun and expose them to more opportunities. Lo and behold, ended up showing that we get academic results. What drives that is attendance. What drives attendance is a great program in relationships. Kids show up for someone and sometimes something. So starting with what kids would love to do, I would advise should be the first step. And then finally, as I transition, I would say that our next speaker is one of 150 programs in the network, but Toni Wiley is one of a kind. She's a local and national leader in the area of sports-based youth development. So I'm going to hand it off to Toni to talk about what it looks like from her perspective. Toni?
Thank you, Chris, and many thanks to all the speakers that have gone before me. I am going to really try my hardest to get out of the way so that we can turn to all the great questions that are in the Q&A. As mentioned, Sportsman's is primarily a tennis organization, but we were founded as a youth tennis organization that was going to use tennis to leverage the kids' interest in tennis and improve their academic outcomes, improve their life opportunities. So in 2009, we launched the Learning Center at Sportsman's. It includes a number of academic and social programs, including School to Sportsman's, which was an intentional effort to remove some of the barriers to what you would traditionally call an after-school program. We wanted to make sure that there was transportation, that there was no cost to it. We wanted to make sure that our summer programs always included academics. We have gender-specific leadership programs. And this is, again, following the founder's goal of using tennis to open doors of opportunity. And we do that by focusing on that achieve, connect, and thrive model that Chris talked about. You can certainly understand how you can use a sport like tennis to help someone learn perseverance, and then you can transfer what you learn to the classroom. We often say that what we learn from a child by what they say to themselves when they hit the ball in the net helps us understand what they're saying to themselves when they struggle with a math problem. It's the same kind of self-talk, and it teaches us how that child learns. In the next slide, we talk a little bit also about how we form the partnerships that have become the basis of how we work. We are a year-round organization. And in 2008, we conducted an environmental scan that showed us that 1 in 4 Boston Public School students had no physical education in their school. We also saw that there were about 10,000 K-12 age children that lived within 1.5 miles of our facility, and that we were in the heart of something that was being referred to as the circle of promise. This was a group of schools that were underperforming. And in most cases, it wasn't the kids, it wasn't the parents, the schools were lacking certain resources. So we found that by partnering with the schools intentionally, we could help them meet the gaps and provide programs and services that the kids needed, that their parents didn't have to pay for. And in many ways, we were looking to find funds that would allow us to provide them to the school system without charging them any substantial fee as well. So we were using and raising foundation dollars to do that, which is why this funding is so exciting. Next slide, please. So one of the programs we started was called Match Point, and it was a process of bringing tennis into the schools. And the goal was to introduce Boston youth to a new sport, help them learn that they can learn something new, help them understand how they learn, and to do so at no cost to them. And by doing that, we deepened our partnership with the school system overall. We deepened our partnership with individual schools, with kids, and with parents, and we introduced them to Sportsman's as a year-round organization. So next from there, we moved to our academic programming. Next slide, please. So our partnership with Boston Public Schools builds on what we do with Match Point by allowing us to form those deep relationships with the schools. By forming a relationship with Boston Afterschool and beyond, we were able to create a summer program that blends everything that's good about the school day and brings to it the things that Chris talked about, the things that make the kids want to show up, the things that make them want to participate. We decided to partner with Children's Services of Roxbury because they are a social service agency that allowed us to figure out how best to meet the needs that we were seeing within kids. It's one thing to see a child after school for 2 or 3 hours. It's something else to have them in your program for 5, 6, or 7 hours. Kids start to break down. You start to see other issues. And so we needed to have a partnership that would allow us to deal with those issues as they arose. Next slide, please. So summer camp is what brings all of this together. It allows kids to socialize, to not be distant. It allows them to elaborate on what they've learned during the school day. It allows them to learn a new sport, be physically active, to get in that level of physical activity that we all know is so crucial for kids, but to do so without sacrificing the academics that we need them to focus on during the course of the summer, especially if there's been any slide or any potential summer learning loss. So finally, in summary on this last slide, here's what I would think about. When my kids were little, we talked about the after school program and we talked about summer. Next slide, please. But instead, we want to think about extended day instead of the after school program and fifth quarter instead of summertime, because it's really one long continuum. You want to build this continuum of programming that will leverage all the relationships that you're building with the student, with the parents, with the teachers, with the paraprofessionals at the school. Those are the relationships that allow you to really maximize the short summer because you already know the child. You already know the family, and you already know the school. If you design programs that have shared objectives like Achieve, Connect, and Thrive, it's easier at the end of the day to make sure that you've met your shared goals instead of trying at the end to figure out how the goals that you set match up with the goals that the school system had. If you start off with shared objectives, it makes life much easier. And again, you want to make sure you form all the partnerships that you need to form that will allow you to serve the continuum of needs of the families that you're going to meet. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Elizabeth so that we can get into your questions. Thank you.
Before you do, Tony, I just want to say something about what you and Chris, I really think, emphasized too. When you talked about attendance, Chris talked about that, and how do you get kids to attend? Because attendance is everything. You can't do anything if you don't have the kids there, right? And you want them there consistently. So Chris talked about engagement and relationships, and we talked about having fun learning. And I can't emphasize that enough because kids will come when there is a great program. And again, I want to thank you and all of our panelists for this discussion and also for sharing these fabulous programs with us, because these truly are model programs. Thank you very much.
Thank
Elizabeth,
you.
it's all yours.
Okay, great. So, we've had a lot of questions about who is receiving the ESSER funds. So I think, Kylie, maybe if you could just talk a little bit about, will all districts receive these funds? Does it include charter schools? If so, what's their timeline for the implementation and allocation of the funds? Could contracts be extended beyond 2023?
Yeah, so these are all really good questions, and I'll start simply. Yes, every school district should be receiving some share of these funds. I think, and Terry, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe when you were referring to the free or reduced lunch percentage, you were suggesting that because these funds are allocated based on a state and further a school district's Title I Part A allocation, schools with higher percentages of children on free or reduced lunch are going to see a larger, longer term benefit for funds, but every school district should receive some portion. Is that correct?
Yes, I was just saying that in some work I've been doing in about 8 states and 10 communities in the last 2 weeks, there's so much uncertainty. People are sort of saying, I don't have, even schools that have 50% or more in poverty, say, I just don't have the money to do what you're describing. And I'm saying, you will. You may not know that yet, but think big. This is rare. Somebody described it to me the other day. If you had a chance to write a 4-year grant for a school for like $1 million or $500,000, let's say, to do after school and summer programming, what would you do? And you would think of all kinds of great things. Well, that's what those schools are going to have. And we need to really think big and different and apply what we heard from Delaware, Baltimore, and Boston. So now other schools will get funding too. It will be less, but then you can combine the 20% set aside with other ESSER money or local and state money or community partners. So you shouldn't, I didn't mean to be negative toward those possibilities. I was trying to speak like a grandfather, kids in 5 states or 4 states, and sort of saying, you know, I'm a taxpayer. When I show up, and if you have a 60% low income kids, you know, I hope to see an after school and summer program that's really exciting in your school. I don't mean that being that blunt, but I think that's what Congress is thinking also.
Yeah, there is a huge emphasis on addressing not only, you know, baseline learning loss and, you know, the need for enrichment for children across the board. There's a huge emphasis on addressing the people who have seen the biggest, you know, the biggest pain from COVID-19. And Congress was very intentional about building that into the American Rescue Plan. If you read any of the language in the Education Stabilization Fund and ESSER sections, that becomes very clear. So thank you so much, Terry. And thinking back to the other questions that came up, Rhonda, so charter schools, if charter schools in your area are considered local education agencies, then yes, they will receive a share of this funding. If not, and frankly, I'm not sure that all charter schools might be local education agencies, then they will not. Somebody else had a question, are private schools going to be receiving any of these funds? So no, but there is a separate pool of funding. It is the emergency assistance to non-public schools. That's $2.75 billion for private schools or non-public schools that will be allocated at the discretion of governors. So that's something to keep in mind. And then was there, what else was on deck, Rhonda?
Well, and all public charter schools are LEAs. So
yeah, that's a good way to put that.
Yes.
So Kylie, what's the timeline that LEAs have in order to allocate or implement using the funds?
So to my knowledge, and I noticed that these were the questions that I didn't answer in the Q&A. To my knowledge, the guidance we have now only specifies the obligation deadline of September 30th, 2020. I am deadline for liquidation or expending the funds. Others might. Somebody in the question and answer actually said that they heard these funds could be spent through 2028. But to be honest, I'm not sure of that answer at this point. But as long as plans are made by 2023, you should be safe.
Are there any requirements on how the LEAs use the funds? Do they have to use it for social emotional learning support, parent engagement? Are there any specifications about about that for school?
So yes and no. There is a lot specified under, in this part of the act for all of the pieces that you just mentioned. Those are all allowed uses of the funds. There are fewer explicit directives on, a certain percentage of these funds must be used for parent engagement or social emotional learning. The only hard and fast percentage we have is the 20% of the whole that must go to, learning recovery, after school, summer. Terry, unless you know otherwise, I confer to you on that.
Can I just add, because
Sure.
20%, when you talk about parent engagement and when you talk about social emotional learning, that's part of a really quality program.
Mm-hmm.
So even though there may not be something specific about those, the whole idea here is to make sure that we provide quality programs for kids and families.
Yeah, the guidance so far from the Department of Education in the handbook I reference, handbook 2, I believe it's called, specifically talks about the importance of building relationships,
Mm-hmm.
engaging families, of social emotional learning, of intertwining social emotional learning with academics and enrichment. It specifically calls out using community groups for enrichment, the arts, physical fitness, career and technical education. Now it's maybe, I'm sensing, I'm not in the government anymore. I was there many years. I'm almost sensing that they're trusting people.
Yeah.
And they want you to look at, we just had 5 great presenters just described, and Rhonda did from the beginning, what is hope for? And it fits right in the middle of that guidance. I mean, couldn't be more. So I don't think you're going to get the detail. You're not applying for a program. You're not applying for the grant. The money is literally in the mail. And the hope is, I think, that you will use that broad guidance to do what's right,
Mm-hmm.
to do what research says and these best practices say.
Superintendents have already received the funds in many states, and they are, just think about it, you're running a school district, you're trying to get kids back to school, now you have this opportunity and you want to make it right, but you need help. And that's where the community partnerships become so important, because you combine academics with the community partnership, with some of the kinds of programs that we heard today, and at least you can get a head start on this summer. Because they have so many other things they're worried about. That's all we do is work constantly now with superintendents who are saying, what should I do? What can I do?
So this is for all the panelists then. How do our summer program providers and after school, out of school time providers, how do they reach out? How do they advocate for their program? Who should they be talking to? Terry, do you want to start?
Can we hear from like Stacie and Chris, I think, and Lara? I think that'd be terrific. And Tony, and I think they can describe it maybe better than I can.
I mean, one of the things that was brought up earlier was this idea of taking what is working and figuring out how to scale it. In Baltimore, there's a new program that Lara and I didn't actually discuss that's called Summer Lit. And we're super excited about it. But we actually started having the conversation in December about, okay, we're going to plan a small program, but we just had a sense that there was going to be big investment down the road, in the new year, and that money was going to come quick. It was going to come, and the issue was not going to be about money. It was going to be about capacity. So then we designed that program in one way where it could be small or it could be really big, really fast. And so I think a great thing to do, community organizations, is to look and see what is the district already doing and how do you approach them with sort of where the value proposition is capacity to increase the number of slots and to do it in a high quality way that is rooted in relationships and the social emotional learning piece that we've been talking about. But that's my suggestion. Laura, I'm curious what you would say.
I think that is exactly right. I also think most school systems will have budget processes that open up. There might be a PQS process, depending on what's needed. There might be an RFP process where I would be paying attention to things like that because, there are even if the funds are coming, there are very clear parameters within each school system that school systems will have to follow. So those are always avenues where there's a process for reviewing, there's a process for, and that can be one way to work. I think the other piece is, I know what I value is when schools and partners, have a strong relationship. And then I look at that and think about, can we scale it? So, if you're a big community partner, I wouldn't come to us at the district office. I would start with schools where you are in the community and show, that you can show a track record with or start to develop a track record with. And then we can think about scaling, right? But scaling involves having something to scale up. And so that's where I would start. Those are the two places I would probably start, I think.
Good advice. What other questions that we didn't answer? I want to make sure we get to the questions.
So is there an external evaluation that's required for programs who are allocated funds?
I'm sorry, you mean for us internally? Or yeah, I mean, we have both an internal and an external evaluation. So partners, when I review applications, I expect them to have an evaluation component on how they're evaluating programming. But we will also often do an evaluation. Ours are public, you can see many of them. We'll do evaluations. We'll also compare programs. I think that can be a little hard because, how do you compare different programs with different focuses? But we do our best to do both our own evaluation and expect partners to have third-party evaluators that will do evaluations for them, or we can go even deeper.
And I think on the level, sorry, go ahead.
I don't know, I was going to say that also, what are parents saying? What do parents feel about the programs? Are we making sure that we're getting the feedback from parents? I know that all of you do, but we want to make sure that we hear from our parents about what changed. How did they see a change in their child? In what ways? And I think that's important. Go ahead, Kylie.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think on a higher level, in terms of that evaluation piece we were talking about, so far, we are still awaiting certain pieces of guidance for the super administrative specifics of the funding. But I think much like what Terry was saying about the trust that the ESSER 3 funds are being allocated with. That's a funny way to say that. I think that the assumption is that you are the programs that have these funds are going to have those evaluative capacities in place already. And ultimately, just from what we know now, the state is going to be the only one reporting anything to the federal government. They have a pretty loose charge to keep LEAs accountable. But beyond that, there isn't going to be any formal evaluation process.
That was another one of the questions people were interested in, is how are states holding LEAs accountable to use the funds properly?
Could I jump in? Maybe Chris, maybe you could talk about, so I think, so in any good program that's going to scale like this one, you would normally have some kind of continuous improvement process. The district might have it, or the community-based organization, or may not. So Chris, I'd be interested in how you would recommend. You have a very elaborate evaluation process across 200 organizations, and everybody seems to love it. I've seen it in person, and who loves evaluation? I do, because I majored statistics, but I'm about the only one. Chris might, but Chris, how would you start sort of what you did, but do it because your purpose is, like Rhonda said, to improve?
Right. So the first thing I'd look at is the evidence-based strategies. That's been studied with a control group over time. That's the most rigorous. But with every season, whether it's summer or fall, we do, as I mentioned, all of our programs adopt the same tools. We view data just as language. And so we do an observation of each program to look at the structure and organization of it, the nature of the relationships among and between the adults and the students, and the content. How engaging is it? How rigorous is it? We also ask, and we do that with so somebody goes into the program and scores it. They're trained to go in and score it. That doesn't interrupt the program at all. And we actually train staff from the programs to observe one another. The other thing is we do a youth survey across the board. So kids give feedback on the program and how well it served them. And as I mentioned before, we track daily attendance and enrollment. So whenever we talk to a program, we ask, who will you be serving? Where are the kids from? Make sure we're serving the kids who need it. We're looking at attendance and tracking that. And then we're looking at program quality from two perspectives. And then we also use another tool where we're observing the frequency with which young people demonstrate skills. And it does serve as accountability, but more than that, we can learn from what we gather in the network. So that's how we use it, because summer days are precious. You don't want to lose 2 of 25 days to tests, in my opinion. We've tried that, and it was expensive, time consuming, and administratively difficult. So those are the tools we use. I dropped the link to NIOST or Georgia Hall's email and the link to NIOST. They've developed valid and reliable tools. They're not the only ones out there. There are lots of tools used around the country similar to them.
Great, thank you. So I see that Sierra has launched the poll. Please take a few minutes to fill out the survey. I just want to open it up to any of our panelists for a final thought before we wrap up this fantastic conversation. Is there anyone who wanted to share anything?
I think that there was so much here today, and I feel that our audience may want to get in contact with some of our organizations so that we can further provide answers to questions. So please make sure that we have everything in the chat box that can direct them to our organizations. We will get back to you. That is going to be so important. There was a lot packed into today's session. And again, I want to thank all of the panelists, and certainly want to thank all of those who stuck with us for the last hour and a half. You're an amazing audience. Thank you.
Oh, Elizabeth, you're muted.
Sorry, I'm just thanking everyone again. Thank you, Rhonda. We appreciate you. This was really a great conversation. I hope everybody will come back and join us for the GLR Learning Tuesdays next week. We have the upcoming webinars on the screen now. Again, thanks to everybody. We appreciate your time this afternoon for this great conversation, and we will follow up with the resources. Make sure everyone stays in touch.
Have a good night, everyone.
Thanks again, everybody.
Bye. Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you.